Hello, and welcome to today's Augustana Human Library session. The title of today's human book is If These Walls Could Talk, and this is the book's abstract. After more than 80 semesters of teaching, as well as founding and co-directing significant student programs, I will share some of the highlights, lowlights, and wonders of CLC, CLUC, AUC, and Augustana. This human book is a living repository of the laughter and tears of the Augustana years. Thank you all for being here today, and welcome If These Walls Could Talk.
Hi, I'm Dave Larson, and as Nancy inferred, I came to CLC in 1971 for the fall. But before I start, I would like to encourage anybody to raise a question anywhere along the line if you'd like me to respond to any particular point or experience that I'll refer to. So you can either enter it or come up with a question, raise your hand. Anyway, I thought I'd start off with the idea of why did Augustana, or what CLC at the time, why did CLC hire me? And it's a curious couple things. The experience of faculty at the time was that CLC hired PhDs if they could get them. And okay, I had one, and it was 2 years old, and I was looking for work, and so that started it. But there were some other factors that were involved. Number one, my family is church connected from the very beginning in my life, and in part of the Lutheran community in the Dakotas. And when I was 14 years old, I was called in when somebody came to visit our house, and it was a recruiter from Augustana Academy. And that was a high school connected with the church, Lutheran church. And lo and behold, I ended up going to Augustana Academy for 4 years for my high school degree. I think the main reason was that our local high school was not certified, so that anyone wanted to go to college from there had to go through an exam program, whereas the academy was certified, and that was a big factor. But it did mean when CLC interviewed me, that happened to have parallel experience with CLC, because the college had not been offering university courses for that long by the time when I came in 71. So that was one factor. The other thing that happened is that when I completed my PhD and was starting to look around for work, it was in the middle of the Vietnam, and very little money was being spent in any place other than in the military, and there were no jobs to be found, and of course the the old "it's who you know." Well, it turned out that one of the college faculty, Bob Ostrom, went down on sabbatical to Luther College, and one of the staff from my teaching that I had been doing for 2 years after my PhD had gone to Luther, and the two were talking in a coffee room, and that's how I discovered the job that was in Camrose. So the other factor, the last factor I think that had a bearing on why I got hired was that after my PhD, I took a job teaching back at Augustana Academy. It was in Canton, South Dakota, and Lois and I were married at that point, and we had a young, rambunctious daughter, and we spent 2 years there before it closed. So that's why I started looking for work. CLC hired me, and it was fascinating to me to experience this because there had been, prior to our president, Glenn Johnson, at the time, there had been a number of years where the CLC had been operated essentially by the faculty with a temporary appointed head. And as a result, the CLC operated very much like a community with minimal leadership in many cases, but that was a good experience. One of the things that happened to me after we hit town is the last day in August, I came up to campus and to look around, and it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday, the last couple of days in August. And I happened to bump into our president, Glenn Johnson, Reverend Glenn Johnson, as he was coming back on campus, and got a great welcome. And he told me a couple things that were happening. Number one, he had just been to the bank and he had just requested a loan so that he could make payroll at the end of August, and tuition would be coming in a couple weeks from the students that would be enrolling that year. Okay, I was not shocked by that kind of a circumstance because, you know, I'd had about 10 years in Lutheran church-related colleges and academies. I had that background experience, and they were always hurting for money. So I was not terribly surprised to hear that was the case here at CLC. The other factor that he mentioned, however, was that they would be building a library, excuse me, they would be building a library soon. And I didn't twig enough to question what soon meant at the time. But I did discover what soon meant. A new library ended up coming down the road about 30 some years later. This is what it soon ended up being defined as. My experiences around CLC and in the various other versions of the campus that have come along over the years has been defined largely by the people who I worked with, and some number of them stand out in many, many ways. And one of those, of course, the person who hired me was Leroy Johnson. And Leroy was principal of the high school at the time. And so I was hired as a high school instructor. In the 2 years that followed, why I ended up getting a teacher certificate for Alberta, and ended up, having to take 3 courses at the U of A in order to make that happen. And during the summer sessions, and that rolled around quite well. One of the experiences I had with Leroy was that I sat next to him in the arena, and he gave me a continuous rundown about what hockey was all about. I was unfamiliar with the game. I didn't know anything other than I was an ice skater, but I had never seen or participated in anything like hockey. So it was a unique experience. The other thing that was interesting about Leroy is that we lived on the same block with him, and our families became acquainted. And Lois had connections with his wife and our daughter, and their kids were active together. So it was a neat experience. However, when Leroy became an MLA, he also had another impact on us, and that was that he was the government rep from Alberta who was at the session when we became a citizen. So there was more than one wrinkle that was associated with his experiences. When I first came for 2 years, one of the people on campus who was away working on their graduate degrees was a man by the name of Gary Gibson. And it was interesting because I took a summer session out at Blue Lake, which is north of Hinton, and he was the instructor, and it was about outdoor leadership. And I didn't know him, and it was a very interesting experience because he handed us in our group a live chicken and said, "Here's supper," and we were supposed to proceed from there. And one of the results of that, of course, was that when he came back to CLC, I volunteered to join him in his outdoor courses. What I didn't know at the time was that Gary, or as I ended up dubbing him, and which was I ended up calling him Gib, and he ended up calling me Doc, and both names stuck. Anyway, the thing I had discovered was that Gib, when I was at that course at Blue Lake, Gib had a 3/4 axe, and I asked if I could use it, not knowing his lumbering background and not knowing that it was very impolite to ask the owner of an axe to be able to use it. It took about 4 or 5 years of he and I working together before one day he handed me his axe, and that was kind of a red letter day. Anyway, I volunteered with Gib, and and quickly discovered that while I had survived grad school by canoeing, various canoeing experiences, this was in Columbus, Ohio, and out of 52 weeks out of the year, that canoe club had operated some type of river trip every one of those weeks. So I ended up acquiring certifications for various kinds of whitewater, and discovered that Gib didn't know river tripping as well as I did. So I was a good volunteer to have with him on those trips. A lot of my background included camping as well. And as a result, I was able to be a good leader to work with Gib. And we ended up with a lot of students that came through our program. One of the things that we sat around and dreamed about was an outdoor leadership school, an outdoor leadership program at CLC. And one of the fascinating factors is that when it came to the faculty about adding those courses, there was very little question about the efficacy or the kind of experience that would be happening, and the assumption was that our leadership would be effective and be able to deal with the risk factors. And I'm surprised by I guess I would say the easy way by which those courses became part of the curriculum. And that once the spring course then launched, why, that was in the month of May. And we ended up taking students out for 3 weeks in the mountains on backpacking and canoe trips, and had some really neat adventures throughout that whole thing. We had we had a good number of risk elements that I'm surprised that the college didn't question us about, river tripping and whitewater river tripping, and the various factors like that. But Gibbon had established a history in which any student that went out with him always came home. And the other thing that happened, of course, was that they had neat learning experience about themselves and about small community living and about tripping. So consequently, Gib and I were willing to not take chances, but be willing to live with the consequences of whatever we allowed students to do on those trips. And those kinds of experiences were often perceived as high risk. Our perception was that it was not a risk that was as high as the student thought it was. And the net result was that that kind of challenge made good tripping. And so many years, one of the things I had noted after, when I was looking back, in the first 8 years that Gib and I were leading trips, we were out of those 8 years, we were out almost 365 days spread over those 8 years. And so it was a significant impact on family life. It was an impact on our school life. And I'm constantly amazed that the college was open to make those kinds of trips with students. And the college was just barely surviving as far as finances went. I mean, there were times that if you had to replace a light bulb in your office, you brought one from home because there wasn't any available on campus. That wasn't always that tough, but it was stressful. And yet the student experiences in those kinds of adventuring was incredibly effective. So there was neat people came out of that. Just to mention a few, maybe you recognize: Randy Clement, Lyle Benson, Les Parsons, Neil Hartling, Morton Asphalt are just to name a few. And of course, Morton was hired back after he'd done his graduate work, so that replaced Gib. As a result, one of the outdoor experiences that is highlight for me was the opportunity to, in summertime, to take students then to the Arctic and be paddling to the North Shore. Well, I went through grad school dealing with mites and ticks, and mites on soybeans. And then when I got to Ohio State, where I got my PhD, it was on house dust mites, and ended up, raising the first colony ever in North America for the house dust program that we had at Ohio State. That whole experience meant that my background in biology was in the invertebrate world, insects and mites and ticks, and the curiosity for me was that CLC was open to adding some courses in entomology at the undergraduate level over the years. And in fact, by the time we finished, there were at least 5 courses here at the undergraduate level that had some connection to insects. That blew me away when I came across some information from U of A they had a very large entomology program, but they did a survey around the province and across Canada. And at the undergraduate level, especially from a private college, having up to 5 courses with some entomology content was basically unheard of anywhere else than at CLC, which was kind of an interesting experience. One of the things that kept me going and kept me at the place. Another thing that happened was Camrose ended up in those first couple of years that I was here having a incredibly heavy mosquito populations in a couple of different summers. And one of the things that the province did was provide money to the communities to do something about mosquito management. When I saw that, I stepped forward and contacted the city here in Camrose and city offices and said, here's my advice to you about doing a mosquito management program. And of course, what they did then is they turned around and said, well, will you do it? I went back to campus, and one of the things I asked was, okay, can we operate out of a biolab? And they said, well, the college said no problem. And any problem if I, hire college students to be part of that program? There's no problem with that. And so that's what happened. So about 10 or 15 years, I ran a combination research program and mosquito management program here in Camrose, run in the summertime with students working for me. So Marion Klein, Marilyn Risky, Dennis Pfeffer, all people who have worked at a college and or worked around here are examples of students that had worked with me. So I usually had a group of 4 or 5 students every summer on that mosquito management program. And of course, the thing that became obvious in a reasonably short time, at that particular time, the city limits of Camrose were 4 miles from edge to edge. And if you think about it, and there's 1 or 2 mile-an-hour breeze blowing across the city, whatever management program that you've done in the city will be wiped out in one night by the new mosquitoes that have drifted in with that light breeze in one day. So managing mosquitoes did not become a high priority for me after that. But about that same time, one of the other things that happened was the retirement of Dr. Risky, and the replacement person that came in was Dr. Doris Audet. And after she had been here a year or two, one day she came in after my lab and asked me if I would ever consider going to the tropics to do a field course. And I said, well, I've never been to the tropics. I don't know the tropical systems. I don't know the life of any of those particular animals. I had learned already by that time that she was a bat specialist. And one of the things that it quickly became obvious was that she had gone to Costa Rica and had spent a number of research trips down there, and consequently wanted to go back again. And she was proposing that the two of us lead a group of students to Costa Rica at midterm break time in the winter term. That happened, and 16 trips later, I made my last trip to Costa Rica, which was one of the outstanding team teaching experiences that I went through with Doris, because number one, she said, let's not make this a, stop for 3 hours at this habitat, another 3 hours at a different habitat, go to a third one, go to the ocean, go to the forest, back and forth. She said, let's go to a site. We sat down, each student comes up with a research plan, carries it out in the 10 days that we're located started out in the dry jungle and then went to the wet jungle in later years. And as a result, there were some incredibly effective learning experiences for students who were along on those trips. It was always fascinating because there was a wide range of student experiences in their personal family trips. And you had people who had been to the tropics with their families, and you had people who had never been further away from the farm than the trip down to Camrose. And the net result was that it was eye-opening for everybody in those experiences. It also gave me an opportunity to be back and working with arthropods, dealing with insects and the various kinds of critters that were in the arthropod world. I remember our first night that we were at the station. It was actually a school that was out in the countryside, and it had been taken over as starting a school for undergrads. And one of the first things that happened was that we saw a scorpion that had just come out of its where it had been spending its night or daytime before it came out to hunt, and then saw 2 or 3 insects at the windows, saw moths, saw some incredible critters along the way. Well, that got all of us excited, and there were a good many trips. In the process, one of the things that I went back for 2 weeks and did a summer study on the ants at the dry jungle, the dry tropical forest area, and took along a student with me by the name of Wes Hunting. And through the experiences he had with us on either both in Costa Rica and back here in Camrose, and he ended up going on and getting a PhD in entomology before he was done. And I've had 3 or 4 other people who have ended up with entomology PhD program as a result of the experiences like that trip into Costa Rica. Another experience was when I was growing up. I discovered a few things about my father. Number one was that he used to ice skate carrying a canvas on a frame that functioned as a sail, and he used to do that on the ice in the sloughs. And when I was fairly young, he came up with a sled and gave me a couple old hay fork handles to be with the nails in the end, so they could use them as poles to drive the sled. And of course, that didn't get exciting enough, so that we put the sled on behind the tractor at the end of a rope in order to be able to enjoy sledding. Well, in Camrose, prior to the Winter Games in Calgary, someone indicated that they were running some natural luge sessions, and so one of the things that I did, because our daughter was going to University of Calgary at the time, we took her down on Christmas time, and I stayed and took the intro to luge. Well, that turned loose a whole raft of experiences over about 25 years. And one of the factors that happened is that we put in a luge track at Camrose, and it was part of the Camrose Ski Club. The other thing that happened was that, of course, I took some coaching courses and ended up building up a background so that eventually I reached the point of where I was rated as an international instructor, although I never went overseas to the World Cups. But we ended up with a training center here at Camrose, because one of the things that we did then was ice the track, a little dimple hill that we have here in the valley. And that particular luge experience was it just exploded in terms of sliders coming back year after year after year, and moving up and moving out. And so we had sliders and that developed. It's Camrose, who went to the World Cups in Austria and Italy, and slid in the mountains over there, and that was great experiences to see. I ended up ended up with one of the students who graduated from the college here by the name of Frode Skålingstad, who happened to be Norwegian, if you couldn't tell. Anyway, his background, he got involved with the provincial level of luge, and he and I then produced a luge team, and we took them to the World Cup race that was held up at Grand Prairie, hosted by that community on the Smoky River, and that was an unreal experience. I was the track director for that particular race, and the only weird thing about it was that when it came the day of the races, why Europeans were there, and everybody across Canada that was involved in luge was there, and of course it was 30 below, so they held the race anyway, and the Europeans, after their first day of sliding, went back to Grand Prairie, and they bought every warm item that was in the Mark warehouse, cleaned them out, because they weren't used to that kind of temperatures. Well, the other element that came about that was a big factor, of course, was the day that the CLC corporation was meeting on campus. And the big question was whether or not the college was going to continue operating as a private college, or were they going to join the U of A? And I was standing in the back of the gym listening to the debate going back and forth about whether or not the college should stay open or stay private, and become a part of the U of A or not. One of the things that, as a faculty member, I knew was that if the college had voted to, or the corporation had voted to stay private, there were close to 11 or 12 faculty members who would be leaving immediately because they had job offers elsewhere. And and it was getting down to one designated speaker, and then they were going to have the vote, and that designated speaker then found a CLC person to make a last comment, and I couldn't believe it, because where I thought the college was going to stay private, why it ended up voting to go with the U of A.
Because for dinner there'd be nobody left.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience, because one of the things that happened was that of course, we no longer had president, so we ended up with a dean. And one of the first deans then was Roger Epp, and he was one of our own. He was a CLC instructor, and he knew the people. He knew the knew the college, knew the boards, and he knew how to make an effective role when he was on campus at the U of A, arguing for our survival. And it was in Rogers. It was in Rogers' period that when he was dean, that the new library was initiated, was built. We watched the hole go in the ground, fill up with water, pump out. Construction continued on until eventually it was dedicated in 2009, I believe it was. And we were sitting in around at the ribbon cutting. We were sitting on the stairs that go up to the second level in the library during that whole time period. And it was, 30 some years later, after I had heard that soon for when we were going to build a library, that it actually was happening. And it was not without some tears as the ribbon was cut. One other very classic kind of relationship that I've had on campus was the opportunity to join in with Dr. Glennis Hood when she started doing a study of the beaver ponds at the Miquelon Lake area. She did her PhD on beaver and was continuing that kind of work. And the Miquelon setup for beaver is very unusual. It's a series of pocket lakes that are pocket ponds that aren't necessarily connected by streams, but the beaver cut their trees for food in and around the ponds, and there's usually one or two beaver homes, beaver lodges then on many of these ponds. Anyway, that research work, she was going to take a look at comparing ponds which had beaver and ponds which didn't have beaver, and trying to identify the factors that were responsible for that. It looked like I began to realize that part of the process would be to be sampling what invertebrates were present in the ponds as part of the question about what type of difference there was between ponds which held beaver and which didn't. So I contacted her and said, hey, I've got background of looking at mosquitoes and inverts in ponds. I'd be willing to help out if there was any way that I could fit in. Well, she took me up on it and spent about 3 or 4 summers working with Glennis on her beaver study of those, what ponds and why ponds had beaver and which ones didn't. And that included ponds that were in the surrounding farming area, versus ponds that were inside Miquelon Provincial Park. Well, that was an absolutely great experience. And the fascinating thing is that, of course, there was Glennis had students working on the project 12 months of the year. And we had a team of 4 or 5 people working on the pond sampling. And it ended up being being a great experience. She ended up with I think it was 4 research papers that came out of that study, and had a great experience with all of the international groups that wanted to get her information and ideas about it, because the Miquelon Beaver Group don't build dams. They just occupy the small little ponds that were left behind by the glacier, and when that went through the area. Anyway, that's why I have stayed in Camrose, stayed at the college, and ended up, I'm sure, stressing some of the leadership around the college with the various activities that we took students out on to be, but those whole learning experiences in the field were highlights of the experiences that I had here. Of course, the dismay is that current COVID effects are likely going to shut down a good many of these field experiences, and we'll see how that goes.
Judy left a message, or sorry, Jody left a message for you, Doc, that just says, thanks for the information, Doc. I always enjoy hearing your stories. It was great to see you. Have to run off to my next Zoom meeting. Take care.
Yeah, it's a curious thing where Zoom dominates our life.
Yes. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions or comments for Doc? Do you see Ellie's comment there, Doc?
Yeah, yeah. That's my granddaughter. She's going through the university experience at the AUC, and handling courses online is not something that I ever would want to have to try to do. And fortunately, I think I retired soon enough to not have to.
Imagine teaching luge on Zoom.
Yeah. Yeah, put a camera on a sled and away you go.
Yeah, yeah.
With the reference to camera on a sled,
Yeah.
that actually happened because CBC Edmonton came out here and did a taping of luge on the hill, and what was it, 2 years ago, January, when they were here, and put it on the TV show out of Edmonton. So it could be done.
I kind of miss some of the things we did in CLC days. This time of year, we would have been gathering together in the evenings to prepare the grounds for grad, doing lots of raking and sweeping and planting and such. And of course, now we have a more expanded facilities department that capably takes care of all of those things. But you've always been a great advocate for the library in my 30 years. I'm sure Oscar before me would have said the same thing.
Yeah.
And you and Gibber have had so many connections and made so many unique contributions to the campus. I mean, I think the luge course remains the only one in Canada like that, right?
Yeah, it is. Well, in North America, actually, in the last 2 winters, it's the only place that's been operating on ice for natural luge.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And of course, all of your trips to Costa Rica 16, you said. I wasn't sure how many years that program's gone, but my goodness, that's been a great success. And I had the privilege of taking 2 entomology courses from you in the 80s during my liberal arts music undergrad. And I played on the basketball team with the older form of that rambunctious daughter you mentioned earlier. So lots of fun connections.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah.